Hi, and welcome to my podcast, Help Me, Rhonda. I'm Dr. Rhonda Karg, and I'm the host of today's podcast with a very special guest, Sam.
Hi.
Welcome, Sam. How are you today?
I'm okay. I have been socializing, Rhonda, which is exhausting for an introvert such as myself, but I'm good.
Okay, you can hang. Okay.
I can hang, yeah.
Good.
For you,
Good.
my dear, for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on this podcast is because you're seriously one of the most fascinating people that I've ever met. Your story is just incredible. So much so,
Yeah.
reading your books and, you've just had an incredible story. And I'm so grateful that you're here today to share more with me. I'm looking forward to hearing from
It's
you today.
amazing. It's amazing
Yeah,
that I'm here to share with
it is.
you.
It is. No, you're absolutely right. You're
Mm,
absolutely right. So we can start from the beginning. Tell us
okay.
about your childhood.
My childhood. I grew up in the 60s with parents who were very loving but very remote, and it was a culture of smoking and drinking. So there was a lot of smoking and a lot of drinking and a lot of kind of absenteeism. And
Okay.
stuff was happening for me that I couldn't, I just didn't know what to do with. I had been molested by a bunch of kids routinely at school, which was something that
Mm,
I couldn't really share with the adults for a lot of reasons. But we tried to share with. I'm just diving in, aren't I?
yeah, no, this is great. No, this is great. Thank
I
you.
I couldn't share with the adults because when we did share, nothing happened. It never changed. So just this kind of absenteeism with the grown-ups, and then I was grappling with a lot of gender stuff, which I'm still even now unpacking. I was I I don't know if my narrative is like I thought I was a boy or I wanted to be a boy, but it's as close to that as you can get. Yeah. And it really blew my mind when I discovered that I wasn't actually a boy.
Really. How
Yeah.
old was that?
It must have been when my brother was born, and he was born with a penis, which I didn't have. And sorry. Yeah. Uh, I think that's when it happened. And I began to pull away from this idea that I could ever be a boy. Like I think it was the beginning of a profound heartbreak for me that I knew, and it would be reiterated over time, that there wasn't the technology, there wasn't the language, there wasn't the understanding, and that I was a girl, and so I would remain.
So, yeah, I didn't mention that. Do you want to talk more just about, we can jump into that area, your your trans history. I'd love
Uh-huh.
to hear more, like how did that evolve over time?
Yeah, so I'm transgender. I identify as a trans man. My take on being transgender is I know there are a lot of trans people who are very committed. They say, I'm a woman, I'm a man. They're very committed to that identity. I don't relate to that. I believe that that is absolutely true for those people. Absolutely 100%. For me, I was socialized as a woman for 47 years, lived in the
Mm,
body of a woman. I tried very hard to live as a female. And so I'm inculcated with all that information. Um, I I feel like my transgenderness is a kind of a longing for something that I will never have,
mhm.
which sounds really kind of sad, but it's just the way that I kind of think about it as this desire for something I can never have, that which is being a man. Yeah. Does that
I've
make
heard other,
sense?
yes, I've heard other trans folks saying, saying very similar things,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. There is
Mhm.
this sense of longing and impossibility that comes for me being transgendered. But
Mhm.
that having been said, it is a joy and a pleasure that I would not give up for anything. I say because I'm trans, but I would, I love being transgender. Like, it is a great place from which to see the world, to understand the construction of the world in gender, to understand the fallacies of the world around gender, and a lot of other things. Once you begin to sort of deconstruct uh, this social idea of gender, you can kind of deconstruct a lot about the world and the way that we are in the world. So I'm grateful for that.
And how is your gender and your sexual orientation? How have those been related or unrelated over the years? Okay, that's an interesting part of your story.
Yeah, so I grew up really attracted to girls, attracted to women. And, I always had relationships with men, sexual relationships with men when I got older, but I never was really interested in having a romantic relationship with a man. And I was very romantically attracted to women. And was so until about the middle of my marriage to a woman when the testosterone hit. I'd been injecting testosterone for about 5 years. And over that time, I began to feel this kind of draw towards men. And this is not uncommon, as it turns out.
Oh, is
This
that right?
it is.
Oh,
My therapist tells new trans guys, you might want to know your sexuality can flip. It's a thing.
really
It is a
interesting.
thing. Yeah, the testosterone is very powerful. Uh, has its own agenda, and yeah. So I found myself really attracted to men, and now I am primarily, I would say, gay or queer. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
queer politically, gay sort of sexually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting. So you dated women in high school, or you dated men in high school?
Yeah, I knew I was a lesbian. I knew that, and I would tell my boyfriends that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I would tell them, and of course, that was just like, whatever. That's so interesting, as long as you're gonna have sex with me or whatever.
I mean, right, right,
Yeah, yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, so I was always longing for some girl, obsessed with some girl, and then dating some guy in high school, and that was kind of my thing. And yeah, and that continued. And I got out of high school and then started dating women. I guess I was like 17 or 18 when that started.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, that's one part of your story that's so fascinating. So
Yeah.
what about what? Oh, yes, go ahead.
No, I was
Sorry.
I was a lesbian, for years, and I came out in 1977, which is a weird time to come out. It wasn't like,
Yes.
woo, everybody's out, but there was a strong gay culture because there was like disco was happening. There was this kind of gay revolution happening. So it was starting, but it was still like kind of a big deal to come out.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
wow. So what effect has this had on your mental health over the years?
Being a lesbian.
Well, just identifying with males and that whole journey that you were on,
Oh
just
yeah.
in terms of your gender.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, as I said, I'm really still unpacking that. The thing about gender is, I've made a great study of men. So while I was dating women, I was always studying men. And I think trans people who identify as a binary, like male or female, we are experts on gender. We are absolute PhD level experts
Really?
on gender. Yeah, because we have been studying and watching.
Oh,
I watched men very closely for years and years and years, and it was, and I had a lot of, and I had a lot of internalized homophobia. So when somebody called me like a butch dyke, it was really painful for me, and I was really upset. I was very mad, even though like I absolutely was a butch dyke, like without question. And but I was appalled. It was so shocking for me to hear that because I had a lot of internalized homophobia and transphobia and all that stuff, um, yeah, that we all do. But I struggled, Rhonda. I really struggled. And I it was such a heartbreak for me as a child to understand that I could never be what I felt I was so deeply, that I just subsumed that. I just buried it, and it was, we're not going to look at that. Nothing to see here, and I just kept moving, So I think the way that impacted me was it created great stress, great anxiety, great depression. I was experiencing major depression by the age of, oh gosh, probably like 6 or 7. And then when puberty hit, it was just like, what is happening? I went from being this wiry little monkey kid climbing around and, being this tough little girl to feeling this pain and this softness and my breast being tender and everything hurt, and it was just heartbreaking to me. And I think I just capitulated to being a woman. Like, what else am I going to do?
Mm-hmm. 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 So you've been very forthcoming with people about your depression and your struggles over the years. And, you've got your podcast called Why Live,
Why
which
live?
is interviewing people about maybe just their own journeys with their own mental health and what gives them meaning and purpose
Yeah.
here on Earth.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would love to hear more about how your depression has affected you over the years.
Sure. What I will say about Why Live was in my most recent bout of suicidal depression, like absolutely suicidal depression. I came out of it. I'll talk more about that later, maybe. And I came out. I went away to treatment for about a month, and I came back, and I was like, the circumstances hadn't changed. I came back from this big working on all this PTSD and trauma. Came back home. The circumstances hadn't changed. How was I going to live? And my thought was, I'm going to call all my friends and I'm going to ask them how they live. And that turned into, I'm going to have a podcast where I talk to all my friends and I ask them why live. And that's where it came from. My last great foray into depression. But yeah, so I was in my first mental hospital at like age 15 or 16 from suicidal ideation and depression. And during that time, the medications were harsh and not great. And the way that they treated women who were depressed was harsh and not great.
Oh, really?
And I wasn't, taken very seriously. I was seen as just another kid who was acting out. They didn't have a full understanding of mental health and kids. My parents, for instance, were convinced that I was just a rebellious kid. Rebellious kids don't want to kill themselves. Like, that is not rebellion. That's a problem. Right. That is a problem. Yeah. And, my parents, as I mentioned, had their own thing going on, and they were kind of absent and weren't equipped to deal with this child who was going through gender trauma and was going through depression and who would eventually become an addict, like very, very immediately really become an addict. They weren't equipped to handle that at all, So, yeah, 16 in my first nut house. Yeah.
What was that like?
It was wild. I was on the ICU. So, they take away your shoelaces and your belt. And they gave me, liquid soap because apparently people choke on, like, all these things I learned about ways to kill yourself, essentially. If you get a 101 of that.
I've heard that before. Wow, that's wild.
Yeah. That you can't have a razor, if you need to shave, that somebody watches and all that stuff. And my friends were, searched for stuff, and, that was new. And my parents thought it was a kick. They didn't understand that I was deeply sick, that I was having a mental crisis. My mother just thought it was some kind of kick that, I don't know what I would be doing there for a kick, but so no real support from my family, except they did let me go to treatment. They did let me go to this hospital, which is saying something. So there was this really tall guy who smoked Newports constantly, who took me under his wing. He was schizophrenic, and he took me under his wing, and he kept me in cigarettes. And I basically lived on Newports and Heath toffee bars the entire time I was there.
Wow. How long were you there?
Just a couple weeks. But there, I remember seeing things like this guy. He was a tennis pro, and he was getting electric shock treatment. He was getting ECT. And at that time, it was pretty harsh stuff. And every time he came to the table, he was like less and less of himself. So that by the time, I had a friend over, and we were all sitting around the table, and he came to the table and just pissed all over it. I mean, just gone. Yeah. So I'm 16, and I'm just, observing this stuff. It was helpful in that I realized that I didn't have that big of a problem, that I wasn't mentally ill in the way that these people were.
Oh, so in that way it was therapeutic.
In that way it was very helpful. Yeah. Yeah. It was like, okay, whatever I've got.
I mean, do you feel like if you had not been hospitalized, do you think you would have attempted suicide?
Yes.
You were convinced.
In some probably passive way. All my suicide attempts have been very like sideways and passive. Like, I'm going to put as much drugs in this spoon as I possibly can, and we'll see what happens, kind of.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
That kind of deal. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to race this car as far as, as fast as I can. I'm going to, do these dangerous behaviors, and we'll see what happens. That was kind of my deal. Yeah. Is this too much?
No, this is perfect. No, this is great.
Okay.
No, this is great. This is great.
All right. Yeah.
No, this is great. So, in terms of what's been beneficial to you over the years, because, a lot of people, especially in the LGBTQ community, really do struggle a lot with suicidal ideation. So I would love if you could speak to that group and to the larger population, but just like telling folks what you've done that has been really helpful to you in your journey with your own mental health and substance abuse.
Okay. Well, I do want to preface this by saying, for all my parents' absenteeism, they were very supportive in a lot of other ways. And, they were supportive of me being gay. They weren't, I didn't get any of that kicked out of the house stuff,
That's amazing.
and so I lucked out with my parents in a lot of ways. And my family in general was very supportive in a lot of ways, very enabling, but very supportive, as families often are. But I started doing therapy pretty early, talk therapy, and I can't say that it was great. Like you were saying earlier, I've had bad therapists, I've had good therapists. I think what's been really helpful for me is community, number one, and my sense of spirituality, I think, has been really helpful. I'm a very gregarious introvert, and I make friends easily. I'm fascinated by people. I want to know, and I love a new friend more than anything else in the world. I love a new friend. And but I don't want to spend a lot of time because it's exhausting.
That's a struggle.
Yeah, that's my deal. So I think it's really, even if you are introverted, make community, find a way to make community. I think I'm very lucky to have found 12-step programs, because there is an immediate community. You can make friends there. You can have fellowship. People are interested in your well-being. They're looking out for you. And I think that's crucial. Whether you have that at church, in your neighborhood, in your family, it's critical. It is that someone knows you and that someone sees you. You've got to be known and you've got to be seen. And you've got to be accepted in all your various broken parts, right? That's what our friends do for us.
Yeah, and I think that, there was a book written a few years ago called The Village Effect, and the basic idea is that it is in our DNA to have a sense of belonging, because as human beings, we are in many ways interdependent in terms of our survival, and how important it is to allow that to happen in your life and let other people be there for you, because especially for those of us that maybe grew up in homes where there wasn't a lot of support, like that was one thing that happened for me when I first got sober almost 16 years ago, was that for the first time in my life, my sponsor, I felt like she had my back. And that was the first time. I'm not saying that's real. I'm saying that was the first time that I felt it.
Yeah.
That level of support. And I was on the phone with her. There was a kind of a crisis that happened, and I called her and was telling her what was going on. And then I said, I'll figure it out. And she said, who will figure it out? And I said, I will. And she said, no, we will. And I was like,
right.
And all of a sudden, I was like, I can dig this. I got it. Awesome. And it really was like that sense of community was huge. Absolutely.
Yeah. I had always been looking for that, and in truth, I was never capable of being a good friend until I did the work of Alcoholics Anonymous or AA or 12 steps. Let me just say that. You can edit all that out, but 12-step programs, I wasn't capable of showing up for anybody. I was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and I wanted very much to be that kind of friend who would just be there and, supportive. And I wasn't. I was duplicitous. I was a liar. I would sleep with your man. I would, I couldn't show up for anything except a bag of drugs,
Wow.
Yeah. So, I learned how to be a human being in 12-step programs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. By the time I got sober, I was I like to say I was feral. Like I had lost all my social skills. I was just wild.
Wow. Yeah.
I'd been on the
Yeah.
street, homeless for a while, and I was always like getting kicked out of the places I lived in and couch surfing, and yeah, it was bad. And by that point too, before I got sober, I was doing sex work and just crazy
Wow.
shit. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I forgot that about your history.
Yep. Yeah.
But,
Yeah. I've just been starting to unpack that too, because I never regarded that as particularly traumatic. It was just what it was. It was just transactional. And I felt for these men that I slept with, I felt like I could feel their need for companionship more than just sex. Like for some of them, it was just a nut. Yeah, it was just sex. But for most of them, it was a little bit of company, a little bit of
interesting.
companionship. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always felt like that part of it was really kind of tender, and cool. But over the years, I've been, sort of unpacking my own kind of attempts to destroy myself as a woman, because I was trans and because I was so exhausted by having to show up in this body I tried, Rhonda, so hard to be a successful woman, like to be a woman. I tried on makeup. I tried on dresses. I really tried to be a woman, and none of it was successful, and it all made me feel terrible. And so that plus the drug addiction, I just had a tremendous self-loathing, and I was just trying to, part of my sex work was just trying to erase my body, like just trying to erase myself. So it wasn't traumatic, but it was a piece of that, that kind of action that I was doing to myself.
How long were you a sex worker?
I think just a couple years. Yeah. Yeah.
I've never done sex work, although I have an interesting story about it. By the way, I'm very glad to see that sex work has become more respected.
Yes.
Occupation.
Yes. Yeah. Because we have friends who do sex work, and it's totally legit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And why wouldn't people do sex work? I mean, this is important. Now, I devoted several years of my research career to helping out sex workers in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
And North Carolina, but primarily my involvement was in South Africa, and it was really fascinating. I mean, women, talk about disempowered women. I mean, that's like, it's pretty amazing, to be in rooms full of grown men talking about how they would take a woman if they saw her out at a bar. They saw that as being their right to gang rape her.
Wow.
And they talk about it openly. It's pretty wild.
Wow.
Yeah. And anyway, I forget where I was going with that, but it's become like a legitimate occupation now, and I'm really happy about that. But one funny story, that's where I was going, is that back when I was in my 20s, I had the phone number of a sex worker, right? Her old phone number. So I would get these calls morning, noon, and night from people wanting sex work, right?
Oh my God.
This one day, I get a phone call, and I thought it was my grandfather at first.
Oh,
right?
Stop! Shut up!
I know. So we're doing like, he's asking me, what am I making for dinner? He's talking about like small talk, and all of a sudden he starts talking about what he's going to do to me, and I'm like, Grandpa?
Oh, whoa!
Oh, and then I
Ah,
figured out what was going on, but like for a minute I was like, Grandpa?
oh my
Yeah,
God. That's
yeah,
hilarious and
you know,
disgusting.
it would be so interesting to go back in time, wouldn't it? Like as things have like I mean, if you went back to being a sex worker in today's, and you were if you knew what you knew now and you went
Uh-huh.
back and you were a sex worker, I'm sure it would have been very different. I mean, the types of environments that people have now, I mean, you look at like OnlyFans and things like that, like it's really, sex work has really come a long way.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
I
Yeah,
think about things like that, like how would I have been if I could do that over, how would I have done it differently?
right, right, right.
Mhm.
Well, I unfortunately, then was under the exploitative pimpage of drugs and alcohol, so that was my driving need for cash,
Mm,
was to get drug
mm,
money
mm,
or
mm.
drugs or groceries. I had one guy, one regular who would buy me groceries.
Oh, that's one. And I bet you, yeah, but you remember him so fondly because of that.
I do.
I mean, look, one time somebody bought me, look, one time somebody brought me a quarter, or no, sorry, half of a half gallon, so a quarter gallon of milk, 4 pieces of bread. They brought that to me and left it on my stoop. And because I didn't have any food. I mean,
Whoa.
like, we're talking when I was a single mom, man, I struggled. I mean, there were
Wow.
times that I like literally ate saltines and ketchup for dinner so that I could feed him
Wow.
mac and
Jesus.
cheese. I mean, we're talking really, really
Yeah.
struggling.
Really poor. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Yeah. My poverty was self-induced and I would steal cheese. Like I got 86 from every grocery store in Manhattan because I would go in there and I would load up on cheese and I would leave and they eventually, would catch on to me.
oh really? That was what, yeah, you were about
Yeah.
some cheese, huh? So tell us, Sam, what are things that you feel like, what areas do you feel like are on the horizon for you to work on?
Well, I can tell you what I'm currently working on. I'm emerging from doing a lot of EMDR. This last breakdown that I had was so powerful and so intense that, as I said, I went away for a month and I did a lot of deep work on that. They were like, you have PTSD, you have trauma, and untreated, it's just bad. It's really going to be bad. And you need some EMDR. I had this experience before of going to treatment for a relapse and them saying you need to work on your trauma. So what I did was I got out and I did CBT and I did talk therapy, but it didn't cut it. It just didn't cut it for me. I thought I had done the work. I showed up for that work and I'd done this work in the 12 steps, but it didn't cut it. So that stuff was still there. So when I began doing EMDR, I was able to really address a sexual assault that had happened that I never really walked through and was holding me hostage in a lot of ways, you know,
Okay.
uh, and just a lot of, deeply traumatic events, some of which are around gender that I have been able to unpack. EMDR is eye movement, rapid, what is it? Eye desensitization, rapid
Reprocess.
or rapid
Reprocess.
movement or reprocessing. So yeah, I forget. I've looked it up a million times,
Eye movement, right.
but they do
E,
this.
eye movement, EM, desensitization, reprocessing.
I'll take it. I don't know, but yeah, perfect. But that has been tremendously helpful, and I am finding that there are new places for me. Um, there are new places of me because I've been moving these boulders that have been in my way for decades. That I have been operating from a place of fear and terror, which has to have impacted my relationships with people and my way of being in the world and my transition, in ways that I was unconscious to. So I'm really excited to have started moving these boulders out of the way and being free from that. Because what is going to happen? I don't know. I'm excited. Let's see. It's cool.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, EMDR is a wonderful tool. It's interesting. My journey with EMDR as a clinical psychologist, it came out probably 35 years ago. It was really poo-pooed by the field for a very long time because there was no research to support it. And now EMDR is like one of the most, I think I've heard it is the most researched method out there. And when I moved to Asheville, I went from being a full-time researcher, part-time private practice, to full-time private practice, part-time researcher. And I came up here, and one of my friends, who was like in a very big way like a mentor to me, because I was doing this full-time and she was doing it full-time. So she's like teaching me the ropes, and she said, "Have you learned EMDR?" And I was like, "No, EMDR is not for me because I'm a scientist, right? No." And she said, "No, you should really look into this. It works." And I was like, "Really? Okay." So I went to the training. We practiced during the training on each other, and it seemed to work out okay. But before I actually start using it with people, like, I need to have a buy-in. I need it to work on me, like really work on me. So we worked on a negative core belief that I had about I'm alone. Like when I was in a emergency type situation and I was alone, I would get very triggered. Like, I need someone here. No one's here. I can't do this. It was like a confidence thing. And I went through the EMDR, and I honestly don't remember the last time I felt like I was alone.
Wow.
And I've walked through lots and lots of crises. Like, I'm talking, breaking down 300 miles from home with my dogs in the car, and it heat index like 110.
Oh my God. Yeah.
300 miles from home. So I just called an Uber and went home, and the dogs eventually cooled down. I put them on cold water when we got home. But thank God for that Uber driver that was willing to take me and 3 overheating bulldogs. But
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was an emergency situation. But like, I've walked through a lot of situations, and like, cool as a cucumber, like it just doesn't bother me anymore.
Wow.
I also had something called accelerated resolution therapy, which is like a hybrid of EMDR.
Oh.
And recently cleared some stuff related to that. And
cool.
I think that has resulted in some movement for me in a positive way, but definitely has promoted growth in me. So I'm really excited about that as well. And just keeping it moving. The day that I stop working on myself is the day I'm in a lot of trouble.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think what helps for me is I am as fascinated by myself as I am by anybody else. And so I'm investigating, I'm curious about myself as well as everything else, and that serves me well. So I will keep doing the work for sure. And I'm not afraid anymore of pain, of the pain that comes from doing the work.
Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because it is painful.
It is. And like, I avoided doing that hard work, honestly, up until somewhat relatively recently, that I was like, okay, I didn't even realize, because it's an unconscious thing. It's a defense.
Yeah.
You're not aware that you're doing it, but you're just kind of like acting like, okay, those things don't matter, or these are important. And like, that thing that used to bother me doesn't bother me anymore. And then all of a sudden you have this realization of like, oh wow, yeah, maybe this is the time.
Right.
And it's tough. I mean, therapy is not easy, and that's why I have a lot of respect for the people that I work with that show up week after week and like do the hard work, you know, and they're willing to go there, go deep. Right.
I have had to sit with my rape, you know, really relive, like in very deep and profound ways, this event that for a long time I totally minimized. I was like, yeah, that happened. It was horrible, and it was okay. But no, I was deeply traumatized by it. And not just it, there were a series of events within the assault that were traumatic, you know. And so it's the work is tough. You have to really want it, but it's amazing. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Are there any books out there that you recommend to people, or YouTube channels?
My book. But not for your mental health.
And you're working on the second one. Hey, look, I bought a copy of your first one for me and for my son. Yeah, it was such a great book. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think you're one of the most fascinating people ever. It's just like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I wrote a book called Trunky, Transgender Junkie. And I just wrote a book called Sugar, a memoir of craving, which just came out. And I'm super excited. Yeah, it's out now. I'm going to do a reading May 12th at Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill. But you're in Asheville, so I'll have to come out to Asheville again.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
I will. I need to get in touch with them. That would be fun.
Do you want to put a plug in for your podcast again?
Yeah, I do. I'm doing this podcast called Why Live? ! Which is where I get to ask people how they keep going. People who've been through some tough stuff, how they keep going, and not only just trudging, but how they are thriving. Because that's what I want.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the main goals that I have in doing the interviews that I'm doing is like I'm interviewing people that have been through some stuff and like can help inspire other people that are out there struggling, because we've got a serious mental illness crisis in this country. And I'm out here, you know, with my practice, with my research, with my podcast, like just trying to make any kind of mental health assistance more accessible to people, making it free. And
that's awesome, Rhonda.
There's just so much that needs to be done.
Yeah. And if a guy like me can get better, because I was a mess. I mean, you've heard my story. I was a mess, and I am really good. I'm really good. And that has to do in a large part from mental health professionals. Yeah, in no small part. So I'm really grateful for all the counselors and all the psychologists that I have worked with over the years. So, yeah.
And 12-step programs have helped out a lot too. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah.
And community. Sure. Yeah. But I did want to put in a plug for folks like you who do this work, which is very difficult. Thank you for your service.
Absolutely. And you too. Thank you. All right. I know that was a lot. You did a lot of socializing today. So I hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening. It was great to see you. We need to get together soon.
Yes.
I adore you. You're important to me. Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks everyone for listening.
Bye.
Okay.
Good
Bye,
night.
Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you.